The land on the southern part of the west side is not economically feasible. The landfills will cost a great amount to repurpose, and so we think that there is a softer use that could be highly attractive to the community, and that would be the cultural rodeo type of venue. Call it a fairgrounds, but we don't think that's the right word for it. I would call it a celebratory venue that could host an array of pageantry and equestrian types of events. Westworld has something like that, and it's known and it's themed on the Western heritage. We would like to see something like this themed on the indigenous historical heritage of this market. And venues like this exist all over the country. In Cheyenne, they have their Cheyenne Days. In Calgary, they have the Stampede. And we think that kind of environment can evolve over on the southern west side, and already starting with the Mission District there. Finally, I think from a residential standpoint, there's some interest on the west side, and there's also a consistent transportation use for equestrians over there. So why not allow some residential, like they have in Norco or Queen, to be over there? And that could create some interesting volume of housing and also accelerate some of the demand over there. And I think as you look at the pageantry of the children that have learned about the equestrian culture there, that could be here in Tucson equally well. Finally, and Jan's going to speak on this more, we don't want to have the city throw money away for projects, but we do want them to use a very clear specified tools that are available to everyone on a very clear criteria to help things get moved across the threshold of success. And I think the most important thing is the better job that is done by the community to make residential and retail happen and all the pageantry happen in the downtown area, the less incentives will be required and things will be more market rate. However, we think it's going to take a lift to make things happen. So the effective use of GPLED, and also we see across the country project-based sales tax tips and hotel motel tax tips being used to help push projects above really makes a lot of sense in this market and will help accelerate the demand. So I'm going to turn it over to Ross now.
We heard from numerous people in the week that we've been here how much they value the heritage of the four cultures here, the desert environment, and how much they enjoy the architecture that expresses that heritage and reflects the setting. And another aspect of that character is scale. While we see a few high-rise buildings that mark downtown and a couple of other commercial nodes around the community, most buildings are low-rise, again reflective of a desert heritage. And the streets have an important role in setting that scale. The streets as they were, at least in the late 50s here, fairly fine-grained. There's a grid system. It's not a rigid grid, but those blocks define the buildable area, and building scale was in rough proportion to that area. Obviously, the urban renewal effects of the late 60s and 70s, like in many other communities, radically changed that scale. And it leads to an effort to try to develop much larger buildings. We'll come back to the importance of that. But another defining characteristic, at least for the downtown area, is ample capacity, whether it's traffic or parking, transit. There's significant investment in those facilities, and I think that you're now poised to reap additional benefits from those investments. So speaking for the downtown as a whole, opportunities to use parking effectively to support redevelopment and new development. You're already doing that, but I would encourage you to continue making the best use of those public garages where they exist. It can lower development costs by not requiring rehabilitated buildings or new buildings to build their own parking. That's a significant cost, which is very difficult to recoup. And that parking, when it's located in convenient ways, can not only support those developments, but can do a lot to support the major events that attract people downtown. You've got the new streetcar going to open service here within a few months. That will, it should encourage additional ridership and visits to downtown, but it will result in some changes in how people use transit, give them new opportunities. It will be very important to monitor and understand how people do use transit. And I think there's an opportunity to do a more detailed analysis of that so that you can refine the planning for the future with the goal of maximizing ridership. Similarly, with traffic, when the Downtown Links Road project is completed, there'll be some shift in traffic, getting a good understanding. It's one thing to do the projections, it's another thing to see how it actually works. It may show, when you see how traffic redistributes, opportunities to adjust some of your streets. We noticed there are some streets that are excessively wide, even today, for the amount of traffic they have on them. You may have opportunities to make those better pedestrian streets or to find other uses for some of that traveled way currently. Church Street south of Broadway is one example. And I suggest keeping streets open. It happens downtowns everywhere. There are proposals to close streets. Urban renewal just obliterated streets, but then you get street vacations for various particular uses. And I would be very wary of those. Sometimes there are good reasons to do it, but again, I would caution, try to keep streets open. It's fundamental to good circulation, not just for traffic, but for pedestrians and transit. And then, where it's possible, see if you can't add some streets back to the superblocks, start to break the superblocks up. And a key part of quality of life is how easy it is to move around downtown. Pedestrians are very important to the downtown life. Your downtown is not so large. It really is walkable in terms of total distance. The problem is sometimes you can't get from here to there, or you can't see that you can get from here to there, or don't realize that you can walk 2 or 3 blocks to get to another destination. So improving the walkways is very important. Some basic housekeeping, completing a good inventory of what you've got and what the quality is, so you can identify where there are gaps, whether it's a trip hazard, you just can't get there, or it's simply inadequate for 2 people to walk side by side. And the most important thing about safety I'll discuss today is the need to keep bikes and streetcars separate. Bike lanes should not overlap with streetcar tracks. The experience elsewhere is simply too grim to warrant that. You've got signs downtown right now, somewhat grimly and ominously cautioning people about the dangers. So I'd spend more money putting the bike lane paint on other streets than putting up warning signs like that. And creating more walkways. As I say, you've got lots of opportunities to walk from block to block here, but if you make it really convenient and apparent, more people will use it. And then giving people good directions shows that Tucson cares about its visitors. You've got a large tourist trade here, a lot of people here for the first time, or they're not terribly familiar with how to get around here. So they need careful guidance from the highway to downtown, from local streets to downtown, to their destinations, to parking, to or from transit, what have you. It's a great opportunity to show that you care, help them, and create a new look for Tucson. Consistent graphics standards for those signs and placement would go a long way to show that you understand their needs and you're addressing them. Now, I talked about downtown-wide things, some more specific opportunities. With repurposed convention center here, with other major attractions, cultural facilities, it's really important to understand the dynamics of their parking needs. How much parking is needed? When is it needed? What are your opportunities to accommodate that demand in existing facilities? What might need to be new? A shared parking analysis would be a very important step to understanding what appropriate solutions would be. And as I mentioned, the big investment in public facilities can reap you many benefits now. One of those, for example, would be to consider opening the El Presidio Garage on evenings and weekends to support cultural institutions and the major events. It's also beautifully located. Parking can be used strategically to create pedestrian traffic between parking and the facility when it's a convenient connection. The ability to walk from the Presidio Garage along the Stravenue down to the theater, the music hall, perhaps the new Arizona museums, the convention center. What a marvelous experience, and the facility is already there. There's no extra cost to develop parking, and it can generate new revenue. It looks like a win all around. Now, once that assessment of parking needs is done, we wonder if it might be worth evaluating the opportunity to construct a low-rise garage, perhaps west of the music hall, could support a number of facilities on the cultural campus, and perhaps whatever happens on the Arizona Hotel site. You've also got the opportunity to increase parking on the street. There are a number of wide streets where there's parking on one side but not the other, or where you have width, you've got parallel parking that could be converted to diagonal. It's a very inexpensive way to boost parking for customers and visitors, and it could go a long way to helping the needs of some of your museums around downtown. Now, the west side, particularly now with the streetcar connection, offers an opportunity to support or accommodate overflow parking from the largest events. I wouldn't want to suggest that the west side is simply going to be a remote parking area for downtown, but certainly in the next few years, that opportunity is there to take overflow for the largest events with little to no additional cost to accommodate that parking. Simply reiterate what Charlie said about the value and opportunity of enhancing horseback riding on the west side. I think it's true to the heritage and origin of the place. It fits the landscape. It's going to be a more less intensely developed area. People already do it, and I think it could become an even more compelling attraction. Now, perhaps the most important recommendation we'll make in terms of planning and design, and I've made these recommendations largely about transportation because I think in the case of Tucson, the issues of scale and circulation are the most fundamental challenges you face when we talk about urban design. So the key recommendation is to create new walkway to the what we would call the Museum Performing Arts Complex here, just at the north side of where we sit right now. And this would be a diagonal walkway from the intersection of Church, Broadway, Congress, through the La Placita site, and then perhaps continuing out. It roughly parallels the streetcar route. It links the east side of downtown, those activities just east of Church, really only 1 and 2 blocks away, directly in to this cultural center, and then allows people to move along the streetcar. It's the best way for pedestrians, bike riders, others to get across I-10 to the west side. It really helps knit together downtown. And it offers, I think, one of the best opportunities to activate the Stravenue and where we sit right now. And in fact, I think, well done, that simple diagonal connection could really help create a new heart of Tucson right here where we sit. And now, to give you some idea of what that connection might look like, Peter Hasselman will share his illustrations and visions for what that might be.
Russ, thank you very much. Those 5 guys are tough acts to follow, I must say. I'm the drawer guy. So much of my work is more subjective than that of my colleagues. One of our goals has been to make the streetscape and pedestrian walkways both satisfying aesthetic experiences as well as technically and programmatically efficient. We've prepared a series of conceptual sketches to illustrate some of our ideas to accomplish these goals. Here's an overall site plan of the study area. Beginning at the right, you will note that La Placita has been removed. It's actually about in the center, isn't it? I'll show you that in a detailed plan in a minute. It was an interesting architectural idea that never arrived at its potential, and its time is past. It has been partially replaced by a monumental flight of steps that we have termed the Spanish Steps after its historic Roman predecessor. At the upper level of the steps are two pedestrian spaces. One is the central cultural plaza linking a new museum, the theater, and music hall. A crescent walkway laid out as an arc from the library to the existing entrance of the convention center, and celebrating a sculptural art walk of meaningful aspects of Tucson's rich history. Along the way, Garrett Ekbo's wonderful waterway is integrated to the maximum extent possible and offers a rich potential. This is the detail of the center portion of that site plan. So for orientation purposes, there's the Spanish Steps, there's the convention center, here's I-10. The entrance axis of the convention center is extended across the street. I got off here. I'm going to ad lib for a minute, but here's the crescent walkway that we talked about just a moment ago, and that purpose, these red dots are the sculptural icons that celebrate Tucson's history, the purpose of which is to get people going that way along this crescent walkway, as well as in this plaza right out behind where we are now, which is a cultural square. So the entrance axis of the convention center is extended across the street to include a new iconic building. The entrance axis of the convention center is extended across the street to include a new iconic building visible as a vertical element from many directions. You're right now at the entrance to the corner entrance of the convention center. And the idea here is a visible iconic center that you can see from all points of the crescent walkway as well as the cultural plaza. The icon in turn points to 4 new buildings that face I-10. Although the buildings are independent, they might have 4 common aspects. They are similarly proportioned, relatively small, have integrated solar protection from the west sun, and are high-tech green buildings. Following the street alignment west, the new Mercado and Visitors Center are sensitively designed to be good neighbors to more locally vernacular buildings nearby. Design elements might include arches, flat-pitched roofs, festive awnings, rich colors, and sensitive detailing. So that's the interior. It's open air, a clear story, metal arches, masonry or stucco arched walls, lots of graphics, and people enjoying themselves as they shop. And from the exterior, you can get an idea of how that looks. It's right on the streetcar line. This is what it looks like from the outside. I must say that I drew it too large. It's really a smaller building than that. But you can get an idea of that it has the potential of being a good neighbor to the buildings nearby. Finally, in recognition of Tucson's love for mountain and desert access and enjoyment, this drawing shows an elevated position on a mountain from which Tucson's panorama can be viewed, including looking down on a possible rural arena with graded bare earth parking for their infrequent events. Taken together, these widely separated elements could have significant benefit to the subtle opportunities of Tucson's next generations. Now it's Jan Manami's time to present her findings on Tucson.
We hope that what we have put together for you today can inspire you to a renewed spirit of public service, both the people in your community and your elected people, your government people, because the public service spirit and the bipartisan action that you're able to is what will help you be able to move forward with this. Of course, you want a thriving city. There's so many good things that we saw when we were here, and you can build upon that. Our panel recommends that actions be taken to foster that climate of cooperation as skilled public servants. Some examples of how that can happen. Well, first of all, this is the Rose Center, which is an Urban Land Institute project that helps people become public servants, skilled public servants. So professional development training, the Rose Center is one place to get it, but also something through the University of Arizona or perhaps the German Marshall Fund. Strengthening civic engagement strategies is important to seek input and build support from community groups. Fellowships for recent graduate students in city planning and policy and administration that fund their employment in Tucson's government. Washington, D.C. has a Capital City Fellowship program that could be a good model for you. And then public leadership training programs in your high schools and colleges would definitely create interaction between your school systems and your governments to push this idea forward. To address this issue, our panel recommends, and this is we believe one of our key recommendations, recommends an ongoing advisory committee that would oversee transparency and accountability. This function would not be binding, but our panel feels that it would be irresponsible for any governing bodies to take action in opposition to the advice of the advisory committee. Another function of this is that the advisory committee members would go back to their individual constituencies and share and interpret the decisions that were made by this advisory committee. As you can see here, City of Tucson, Pima County, Rio Nuevo, University of Arizona, public transportation, retail, developer, and non-governmental office occupant would represent a broad spectrum that would bring these consensus together. Data. It's an absolutely important criteria to assess what you have done and to move forward to assess. We had some challenges in finding data that would support the research that we were doing here. So we encourage really strong thinking about data. We concur with the IBM Smarter Cities report that came out about Tucson earlier this year, suggesting an IT master plan. But recognizing the data, that being able to measure what you do, and that data drives so much of the improvements that we're looking for and recommending with this plan. Websites are also important, and they manage a good portion of the data. And they're an important communication tool, offer government transparency, a user-friendly portal for people to get information. Sometimes small tweaks can be save a tremendous amount of staff time and make information readily available to the public. In particular, search engine optimization should be excellent. It can be a resource for an archive of current neighborhood and business activities. There could be links to different neighborhood and business association groups to encourage civic engagement. Of course, some people are still going to use the telephone. So it's important that there is good customer service whenever anyone wants to speak with a government person by telephone. We looked at some best practices, and one example is a one-call center where an actual live operator answers for a government entity and can quickly and easily direct them on to where to answer the questions that they need to have. Another option would be a citizens ombudsman. That person would be available for research and be able to address citizens' inquiries and get answers for them. By the same token, the ability to ensure timely consideration of development issues can be bolstered with a similar ombudsman-type program for the development community. That person could coordinate between city departments and coordinate between city council and city staff. Also, through this position, the city could develop a green tape program which would expedite, pay attention and focus on downtown projects for expediting. This was quite a while ago. In a climate like the one you enjoy here in Tucson, public spaces like this are particularly important. Hardscape space is in abundance right north of where we are now, but it isn't used all that often. Of particular note is what you see here, some of the original pictures of Garrett Ekbo's work. Ekbo was a landscape architect with a social art. He felt that what he designed needed to engage the people. The design that he provided here for what was then the Tucson Community Center, his aim was to bring people back into the area that the center displaced from its creation. His design of the plaza invites passersby to participate in it, and the various terraces provide a perfect setting for outdoor performance and informal gathering. Our panel recommendations, of course, will respect his concepts. The entire length of this avenue is suitable for events and should be programmed. What I'm going to ask you to do, you've been thinking a lot when you've seen some of the other materials. What I'm asking you to do now is to imagine. Imagine that you could get up from your seat and walk through that wall. Imagine that there's plenty of people already out there. The pictures here are from the porch in Philadelphia. Bryant Park has also been activated in New York, and there are other examples around the country where especially hardscape settings can be programmed with activities, performances, art, food and drinks. Group fitness has become very common in larger cities where people meet for yoga or I've seen Tai Chi. So this is a perfect setting for that. And of course, special events. You have many, your second Saturdays, other events. But there could be small events, individual events. To begin measuring the activation, we talked about data. Best practices recommend pedestrian counts. So one of our recommendations is to get one right now so we know, so you can measure how many people pass a certain spot today and how many people, or Monday, how many people pass a certain spot a year from now. And that can be a measure of what kind of activation you've done here. Additional activation steps that could begin within a year revolve around programming the space. I'm not sure that's a concept that you are familiar with, but what it means is that someone plans the activities. For instance, that miniature golf that you see on the porch, they brought those in for 1 month into that space, and so people could come downtown and play miniature golf right in the middle of downtown, but just for the month, and so it attracted a lot of people. It was pretty interesting. Here are some suggestions adapted from best practices in other cities. We know that we are recommending that La Posada be replaced with something else, but in the meantime, it's a long face with a bunch of empty windows. Those spaces could be donated for children's activities or museum activities or University of Arizona activities. You could fill the windows with art from some of the, there's a fine arts magnet elementary school here in downtown. So there's many things that could happen along those lines. Develop a food cart program. It's important to have a program in place before you allow food carts just to show up and serve people, but that would be particularly helpful if they start here and go up over the Garces Footbridge and are able to serve the employee population.